Hey, church, good morning. A happy Tuesday to you. Pastor Matthew here again, continuing our series on the book of Ruth. You'll remember that the book of Ruth is a book about suffering, and it's a book for anyone who's trying to reconcile the love of God with the presence of brokenness in this world. We're still in chapter 2. We're at the end of chapter 2 now, and you'll remember at the beginning of chapter 2, we met a man named Boaz. Now, we've been focusing more on Ruth and Naomi, but I want to talk a little bit about Boaz today. We saw last time in verses 8 and 9 that Boaz was incredibly generous. He gave Ruth special access to the workers' water fountain, which she would not have typically had access to as a regular gleaner. And we see now at the end of chapter 2 even more ways that he helps her. He gives her access not just to that, but to the workers' lunch. He allows her to eat with the people that he's hired to work his fields. And he also allows her to glean not just behind them, but in their finished work. Even more than that, in verse 17, we see that he gives her an ephah of barley on top of everything that she's gleaned, and he sends her home essentially with this doggy bag for Naomi, making sure that she has enough. He is showing her incredible generosity, and he shows her generosity beyond what the law requires. She's gleaning, which means that she's following behind workers in a field, picking up what they drop, and that's something that the law in ancient Israel required so that the poor would be cared for. But here we see a man who's going above and beyond what he's required to do. He is out of his heart showing generosity to this woman and her mother-in-law who are suffering. And so we've seen that Ruth is willing to lose everything. Boaz, on the other hand, is willing to give everything. Ruth is willing to lose everything in following with Naomi. Boaz is willing to give everything. And so there are two different examples of what it looks like to show Hesed love. Remember, Hesed is this word that's talking about God's never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. And Ruth and Boaz are just two different examples. One of them doesn't have wealth, and the other does. Boaz obviously is a man of means. And so he goes above and beyond to use those means to care for those who suffer. The question then that this passage poses to us is, who's gleaning from you? It's tempting during times of suffering to hoard and hold on to what we have, especially for people that are wealthy. Maybe we just thank God that we have resources and then move on. But we see here that Boaz models something different. He uses his resources to bless those around him. He provides work. And so it's a question that's worth asking for those of us who have not experienced a financial setback at this time. How can we be someone like Boaz who helps others, who uses our power and our wealth to lift up those who have less than us? Remember, he doesn't just do this for his family members. It's repeated again in this section that Ruth is a Moabite. She's a foreigner. And yet he's willing to help even a foreigner. Now we find out in verse 20 that he's a redeemer. Ruth goes back and Naomi tells her, hey, this man is one of our redeemers. She says the man is a close relative of ours. Now, this word redeemer was a technical term in the Old Testament, and it referred to someone who was responsible within a family for using their wealth and their power to lift other people up. They were meant to prevent people from going into slavery. And the reason that God gives his people that they have redeemers is because he is their great redeemer. And so God, as their great redeemer, asks them to be smaller, lesser redeemers. And they do this because God has brought them out of slavery from Egypt. And so they are also to prevent their people from going into slavery. God is telling them, I redeemed and saved and rescued you. And so you redeem and save and rescue others. And that helps us to see that Boaz here is not someone who, as I've said many times, is not acting out of moralism. He's not doing this to be a good person. But he's doing this because he knows the God of never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. He knows that God redeemed him and his family and the nation of Israel from slavery. And so he is going to redeem others from slavery as well. He's going to prevent Ruth and Naomi from being destitute. Of course, we've seen an even greater act of God's redemption while people in the Old Testament look to God's faithfulness in the Exodus, bringing them out of Egypt and slavery there. We've seen God's faithfulness through Jesus Christ. He's given us a greater exodus, bringing us out from slavery to sin when he died on the cross. paying the penalty that we should have paid for our sins, living the life that we should have lived, and giving that life to everyone who has faith in him. And so we can follow after Boaz not as good moral people, but as people who have faith, understanding the love that God's shown us and extending that love to others. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.